Chapter 1. Dennis had been dreaming of a quiet evening just one, where he and his wife, Steph, could sit on the couch without 8-year-old Pammy bursting in demanding snacks, cartoons, or lengthy explanations on why kittens can't wear roller skates. Steph felt the same. They loved their daughter, absolutely, but the idea of grown-up time without being interrupted every 4 minutes felt like paradise. That's it, Steph finally said one night, brows furrowed with determination. We're signing her up for Girl Scouts. Dennis nodded solemnly, as though they were preparing for a serious mission. I'll take her. And so the next afternoon, Dennis drove Pammy toward the Girl Scout registration center, sunshine weaving through the windshield. Pammy sat in the back seat, arms crossed tightly across the front of her unicorn hoodie, bottom lip stuck out in a stubborn pout. Dennis tried his best salesman voice. Sweetie, you're going to love Girl Scouts. I mean it. You get this really pretty uniform. Pammy narrowed her eyes. What uniform? Oh. Dennis perked up. It's adorable. A jumper, a vest covered in patches and pins, white tights, shiny Mary Janes. You'll look so cute. Pammy's face turned into a glare so sharp the rearview mirror practically flinched. Dennis cleared his throat and tried again. And the arts and crafts. You get to make all kinds of things, bird feeders, clay turtles, those little woven pot holder things, so many crafts. Pammy just slumped further into her seat. And the badges, Dennis exclaimed, reaching for enthusiasm. There's a design with nature badge, the snacks badge, making friends, dancer, cooking-o. I would love that one. You get to do all the fun stuff like cooking cookies and Pammy. Why are you shaking your head? Because I don't want to go, Pammy said flatly. Dennis sighed. If I were able, I'd join myself. I'd have so much fun. Pammy raised an eyebrow. Then why don't you join? Dennis chuckled weakly. Well, because I can't. It's for girls. And besides, but he didn't get to finish, because the world flickered, just slightly, like someone had tapped the screen of reality. A whisper of magic unseen, but definitely present slipped through the seams of existence. By the time they pulled into the Girl Scout registration center's parking lot, something had changed. As they walked inside, Pammy gasped and pointed. Daddy, look. A giant poster had been plastered just inside the entrance. Bold pastel letters announced, new for this year. Adult men can now join Girl Scouts too. The poster featured smiling men in light pink jumpers with matching vests, sashes, white tights, and pink Mary Jane shoes. They were making macaroni art and holding hands in a friendship circle. Dennis froze. This wasn't... He shook his head vigorously. This must be a mistake. But Pammy crossed her arms and tilted her head with all the judgment of an 8-year-old Supreme Court justice. You said you would join if you could, she reminded him. So go on. Dennis tried to backpedal. Sweetheart, I meant that as well, like a figure of speech. A hypothetical. But she was staring up at him with disappointment blooming in her wide eyes. So you were lying? That was the killing blow. He couldn't let his daughter believe he was a liar-not over Girl Scouts. With the weight of fatherly responsibility crushing him, Dennis muttered, fine, and signed his name under the line, Adult Male Troop Member, Special Activities Group. Pammy squealed in delight. Steph later laughed until she cried, and Dennis's fate was sealed. The next Tuesday, Steph drove him to the Girl Scout Center. Pammy came along, practically vibrating with glee. Dennis sat stiffly in the passenger seat, wearing the full uniform, light pink jumper, matching pink vest, covered in the mandatory patches, number, American flag, Girl Scout emblem, and a few pins they insisted he earn during orientation. A pink sash, white tights, pink Mary Jane shoes that clicked on the pavement with every reluctant step. Pammy kept giggling behind her hands. Even Steph took photos, many photos. Inside the building, a cheerful woman in her 30s greeted them. You must be Dennis, she said brightly. Welcome to Troop Blossom Breeze. Come on in. Steph nudged him. Pammy pushed lightly at his elbow, and Dennis, resigned, followed the troop leader inside. The room was a riot of pastel decorations, glitter posters, rainbow streamers, and construction paper turkeys. It was unmistakably designed for 8-year-old girls. And yet, there they were, a dozen grown men, all dressed exactly like Dennis pink jumpers, pink vests, white tights, Mary Janes sitting cross-legged on the floor around a big bin of tempera paint. Every single one looked as trapped as he felt. Okay, gentlemen. The troop leader clapped her hands. Let's start with our Thanksgiving turkey handprints. Dennis blinked. Turkey handprints? Oh yes. Then we'll practice our silly Thanksgiving song, and after snack time, we're going to work on our sharing and caring worksheets. One man groaned softly into his palms. Another whispered, "I used to be a manager." Dennis sat down. His jumper puffed slightly around his hips as he perched on the floor. This was his life now, every week, until at least summer. Pammy waved cheerfully at him through the door as Steph snapped one more picture, and Dennis slowly dipped his hand into the orange paint, trying not to think too hard about the fact that he was earning a badge labelled Turkey Time Fun. Chapter 2. The room smelled faintly of tempera paint and construction paper. The troop leader walked between the low tables, showering praise in a cheerful stream. "Oh, that's a lovely feather, Tom. Good spacing, Roberto." Such expressive hand shapes, Dennis. Dennis tried to focus on his turkey handprint, spreading the orange paint across his palm and pressing it carefully onto the paper. But his attention kept drifting toward one of the men on the far side of the room. The man Dennis thought his name might have been Blake was muttering under his breath, softly, but sharp enough that it carried through the sing-song cheerfulness around them. He was dressed just like the rest of them in the pink jumper, pink vest, white tights, and Mary Janes, but even in this surreal gathering of grown men dressed as little girls, he somehow stood out, his expression pinched tight, his motions jerky, irritated. Then suddenly, Blake set down his paintbrush, pushed his chair back, and muttered, louder this time, "I'm not doing this anymore." He stood and strode out of the room. Every man froze mid-turkey. One of the leaders, Miss Allison, quickly followed him out. The door shut softly behind them. A thick, awkward silence settled. No one dared ask questions. A couple of men exchanged looks that said exactly what Dennis was thinking. What now? 5 minutes passed. Finally, the door opened again. Miss Allison returned, holding Blake's hand as if he were a child just escorted back from a trip to the bathroom. In Blake's other hand was a small juice box apple with a smiling cartoon fruit on the front. And Blake was smiling. Not a sheepish smile, not an embarrassed smile, a bright, happy, uncomplicated grin stretched across his face. Dennis blinked. What happened? Blake beamed. "I was thirsty. They got me some juice." He said it as though that explained everything. He plopped back down in his chair and immediately began working on a fresh handprint turkey. Except now he wasn't grumbling. He wasn't scowling. He wasn't resisting. He worked with intense care, tongue slightly poking through the corner of his lips as he painted vibrant feather colours. He hummed softly. He even added glitter glitter with heartfelt commitment. When he finished, he raised his hand eagerly. "Miss Allison, look what I made." His voice was chipper, bright, childishly proud. 2 leaders hurried over, gasping in overdone delight. "Oh, Blake, this is wonderful. Look at those feathers. Such creativity. We're going to give you a special turkey artist badge for this." Dennis's mouth fell open. The rest of the men received the standard badge, but Blake, glowing with joy, received a shiny foil-printed badge shaped like a turkey with little cartoon eyes. Blake stared at it as though it were the greatest achievement of his adulthood. He clutched it to his chest, grinning at everyone around him. Dennis looked around frantically at the other men, hoping someone else noticed how bizarre this was, how wrong it felt. But before anyone could discuss it, Miss Allison clapped for attention. "Okay, true up Blossom Breeze. It's time for our gobble gobble sing-along. Everyone to the rug." The men shuffled over. They formed a circle, and Miss Allison began leading them through a ridiculous little number. Music. "I'm a silly turkey. Wobble, wobble, wobble. If I hear the oven, I will hobble, hobble, hobble." Music. Most men followed along weakly, mumbling the words. One man, Gary, barely moved his lips at all. Miss Heather, the other troop leader, strolled over and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Come talk with me for just a minute, okay?" Gary sighed heavily and followed her out. The group kept singing. Dennis's voice wavered as he sang the ridiculous gobble gobble chorus. He kept glancing toward the door. Gary was gone for 3 minutes. When he returned, he was laughing. And when he joined the circle again, he didn't just sing, he belted the turkey song like it was a Broadway audition. He even shook his hips on the hobble 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 part. He giggled at the lyrics, clapped his hands on the beat, and wiggled happily, as if the earlier resistance had never existed. Dennis stared at him, throat dry. Blake was babbling excitedly about his special badge. Gary was gobbling louder than anyone. and the room filled with glitter and singing and smiling adult men in pink jumpers suddenly felt like a place where things were changing in ways no one could fully see. Dennis swallowed hard. How many weeks of this? And what will I be like by summer? Chapter 3 here is the continuation, keeping the tone consistent and deepening the unsettling transformation occurring in the troupe. When the silly turkey song finally ended with a dramatic final gobble, gobble gobble, the troop leaders clapped excitedly. Excellent work, everyone. Miss Heather beamed. An especially wonderful participation from, she looked at her clipboard, Gary. Gary practically glowed. You've earned your silly song singing badge. She handed him a shiny badge, printed with musical notes and a cartoon turkey wearing a pilgrim hat. Gary held it reverently, eyes shining. Blake leaned over from his seat on the rug. Gary, that is so cool. Gary smiled bashfully. Not as cool as yours. That turkey badge you got was really special. No, yours is better. Blake insisted. No, yours is, Gary countered. They giggled, full-on delighted little girl giggles. And just like that, the two grown men bonded over their shiny badges, comparing designs, discussing where on the sash they planned to iron them, and wondering how soon they could convince someone at home to help them attach them. Dennis watched them chatter excitedly and felt his stomach drop. This is spreading, he thought. They're changing. But before he could dwell on it too long, Miss Allison clapped her hands next to a table piled sky-high with ingredients. "Okay, Troop Blossom Breeze," she announced. "It's Chex Mix snack time." The men rushed over faster than Dennis expected, some skipping with excitement. Over a dozen boxes of Chex cereals were lined up. Corn Chex, rice Chex, wheat Chex, chocolate Chex, cinnamon Chex, even the weird honey nut Chex nobody bought on purpose. Next to them were bowls of popcorn, pretzels, peanuts, chocolate chips, dried banana slices, marshmallows, and gummy bears. The challenge? Make your own unique Chex Mix. No eating until everyone was finished. And remember, Miss Heather said kindly, one of you will win the perfect mix badge. The men grew laser-focused. Dennis blinked. A few hours ago, these were adults who paid taxes, drove cars, and had careers. Now they were comparing cereal textures. Chocolate Chex is the best, Gary declared, scooping with abandon. No, cinnamon gives it personality, Blake corrected, sprinkling carefully. Sebastian, a tall, quiet man with salt and pepper hair, methodically layered his bowl like an artist creating a masterpiece. Dennis tried to work normally, but the nervousness in his stomach made his hands shaky. He added a bit of everything, hoping for the best. When everyone was done, the leaders inspected the bowls one by one, tasting, smelling, discussing the merits as if judging fine wine. Finally, Miss Allison held up one bowl dramatically. Our winner is Sebastian. Sebastian's mouth fell open in shock. Then he stood up straight, chest puffing with pride. You made a Chex Mix that was bold, crunchy and daring, Miss Heather added with a grin. Come receive your perfect mix badge. Sebastian was led into the side room where Blake and Gary had previously been taken. 5 minutes passed. 5. Silent. Then Sebastian returned. But something was different. He wasn't smiling politely like before he was beaming. His eyes were bright, almost sparkling. He clutched his new badge like it was a treasure, rushing straight toward Blake and Gary. You guys, he squealed. Look what I got, Blake gasped. Gary clapped excitedly. You got a special badge? You're so lucky. We all have special badges now. They formed a little circle, bouncing on their heels, badges held proudly to their chests. Sebastian joined their excited chatter seamlessly, as though he'd been part of their little group forever. Meanwhile, the other men sat at the table snacking on their homemade Chex Mix, with either milk or juice, quietly satisfied. But Sebastian, he hadn't stepped out of line at all. He didn't resist. He didn't grumble. He simply went to get a badge and came back changed. Dennis felt cold. This is happening to all of them, he thought. One activity at a time, one badge at a time. He looked down at his own empty sash space. What if I get one? What happens to me then? He felt his breath hitch. The troop leaders clapped again, cheerfully announcing, next up, circle story time. Dennis swallowed hard and wondered how much longer he could hang on. Chapter 4, after snack time. The counsellor clapped sharply, signalling that it was time to tidy up. The rustling of napkins and the soft click of juice box straws being tossed away filled the room as everyone prepared to line up. All right, everyone. Hands together, just like before. she called with practiced cheerfulness. A few reluctant groans rose from the group, but soon enough small hands were reaching for each other, forming one long, wiggly chain that stretched almost the full length of the hall. Some of the boys shifted nervously from foot to foot, others swinging the hands they were holding with exaggerated, silly enthusiasm. It was still faintly embarrassing for them, but they were becoming accustomed to the routine follow instructions, stick with the group, and try not to attract attention. Once the line was complete, the counsellor guided everyone down the corridor toward the restrooms. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the polished floor echoed softly beneath their shuffling feet. A few whispers travelled through the line, complaints, jokes, little bursts of nervous laughter, but the pace remained orderly. 3 at a time, the counsellor reminded. You know the drill. Gary, Blake, and Sebastian were of course the first trio chosen. They exchanged small looks of resignation. After all, they had become the default starter group for nearly every structured task. Without protest, they stepped forward and were ushered through the restroom door. The door swung closed behind them with a padded thump. Then the next 3 were called, and the next. Each group disappeared inside, spent a brisk few minutes under quiet supervision, and then stepped out again, a little more subdued, falling into a neat line to wait for everyone else to finish. The rhythm of it was strangely mechanical, like an assembly line of compliance. And yet, beneath the routine, there was a simmering tension. No one said it aloud, but each boy knew that the restroom break wasn't merely logistical. It was another opportunity for the counsellors to observe, correct, nudge, and gently reinforce the transformations underway. For now, though, they simply waited, hands clasped again, eyes drifting between the floor tiles, the ceiling lights, and the closed restroom door, wondering what would come next once the entire line had completed the quiet, orderly procession. The last group of 3 boys stepped into the restroom, looking every bit as anxious as those before them. The door shut softly behind them, and then the line waited. A minute passed, then another. There had been a steady, predictable rhythm until now 3 go in, 3 come out unchanged in appearance, for the moment at least, then fall back into line. But this time, the quiet in the hallway deepened. Even the usually chatty boys fell silent, sensing that something different was happening behind that door. Then it opened, and the 3 emerged, but not as they had gone in. Each of them wore bright, glittering play jewellery that jingled and bobbed as they walked. Oversized plastic earrings shaped like ponies or prancing horses, colourful necklaces strung with fairy charms, bracelets covered in pastel hearts and tiny stars, little clip-on brooches shaped like unicorns, rainbows, and smiling suns. The transformation was so sudden and so pronounced that even the counsellors seemed momentarily satisfied, standing with folded hands and pleased expressions. The boys, if they could still be called that, were admiring their accessories unabashedly. "Oh, yours has sparkly wings," one said, pointing at his friend's fairy necklace. "Trade you," another offered eagerly. "I like yours better. Mine doesn't change colour in the light. My unicorn pin is my favourite," the third said proudly, touching it with delicate fingertips. "It's a jewellery patch, see?" He turned slightly so the others could inspect the shiny sticker-like badge adhered neatly to his shirt, right over the heart. The other 2 nodded with an almost ceremonial seriousness. "Jewellery patches are the best," one murmured reverently. They stood in a little huddle, whispering fast and excitedly about swapping their new items ponies for fairies, unicorns for stars, hearts for rainbows. Their voices had a soft lilt to them, light and strangely sweet, as if the jewellery carried more than just plastic and glitter. Down the line, the remaining men stiffened. Only 4 were left unchanged. Only 4 still stood in plain shirts, without the pastel charms or delicate trinkets that had begun to spread through their once all-male group with startling speed. The newly decorated trio drifted to the end of the line, their bracelets clinking, their faces bright with innocent satisfaction. The counsellors clapped cheerfully. "Wonderful. Now everyone wait right here, we'll move on together." A quiet dread settled over the final 4 men. Their eyes darted, unspoken questions hanging thick in the air. They knew their turn was coming, and they knew, with a sinking certainty, that the restroom door was no longer just a door. It was a threshold, a changing room, a point of no return. Chapter 5. After the checks mix and jewellery activities, the counsellors announced it was free playtime. Dennis exhaled quietly, hoping for a brief reprieve from structured tasks. The men immediately started darting toward different corners of the room. Some were quietly comparing badges, Others were experimenting with the glitter and craft supplies left from previous activities. A few had begun forming small groups, mimicking the chatter of the 8-year-old girls the room was decorated for. It didn't take long for a more spontaneous idea to emerge. "Let's play hide and seek," Blake shouted, hopping on the rug like an excited child. Gary and Sebastian immediately cheered. Before long, Dennis found himself reluctantly swept into the excitement, trying to blend in without drawing attention. The room became a blur of pink jumpers, white tights, clacking Mary Janes, and glitter as everyone scattered to hide. Dennis ducked behind a low table, palms pressed against the wooden edge, his heart pounding in his chest, not from exertion, but from fear. Of course, this was the moment the troop leader chose to approach. She walked slowly, deliberately, until she was beside him. Dennis's chest tightened. "You don't seem to be having much fun," she said, her tone soft but probing, her eyes watching him carefully. Dennis's throat went dry. His mind raced. "If I show hesitation now, if I let a single shiver of fear or doubt slip, it's all over. They'll know I'm resisting." "Oh no," he managed, forcing a bright smile. "I'm having a lot of fun. This is all great. I am very happy." The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but he kept his voice cheerful, steady. He clutched the hem of his pink jumper nervously, trying to keep the small tremor in his hands hidden. The leader's expression softened slightly, almost approvingly. "Okay," she said, nodding. "Then you can go play with the others." Dennis exhaled silently, allowing himself to move back into the swirl of hide and seek. The sounds of laughter, squeals, and playful scuffles surrounded him. His body followed the motions of fun-ducking behind a chair, peeking around a bookshelf, creeping quietly toward a corner, while his mind kept score of every detail, every badge, every jewelry patch, every strange, soft laugh that seemed to come from deep inside him. He had to appear joyful, or the next step, the next transformation, would come too soon. And yet, as he moved through the game, Dennis realized something unsettling. The more he mimicked the behavior, the easier it became to slip into the excitement. He was smiling, giggling softly, almost without realizing it. His heart was still pounding, but not entirely from fear. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny, reluctant spark of something else was flickering something he couldn't quite name. For now, though, he forced himself to focus on the game, on blending in, on hiding, on counting. He couldn't afford to think about the inevitable. Not yet. Chapter 6, the hide-and-seek game, ended with a burst of laughter and cheers. Wesley had been found last, hidden behind a row of shelves stacked with craft supplies, and his triumphant face had practically glowed when Miss Heather pinned a small patch on his jumper. The patch a bright, cartoonish starburst with hide-and-seek champion written on it sparkled under the fluorescent lights. Wesley beamed, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet. The moment the badge was attached to his sash, his entire demeanor shifted. He giggled in high, musical tones, clapped his hands together with delight, and began skipping around the room, chatting animatedly with Blake, Gary, Sebastian, and the other men who had already transformed. His voice carried that unmistakable, bubbly energy like a little girl, completely absorbed in play. Dennis watched with a tightening in his chest. Every glance toward Wesley, every movement of the other men, was a stark reminder of what was happening. The transformations weren't subtle anymore, they were full-bodied, full-personality changes. Miss Allison clapped her hands to gather everyone. "All right, Troop Blossom Breeze. Story time." A large pile of costumes was brought out. Dresses, tiaras, capes, sashes, and wings were laid across the table. "Everyone will have a part in our story today," Miss Heather explained. "As we read, you'll act out the roles. Let's make the story come alive." Dennis's stomach knotted as he watched the men eagerly rush forward. They dove into the costumes with gusto, sliding into twirly skirts, snapping on wings, adjusting sashes. Laughter bubbled through the room. The sounds were high-pitched, musical, and eerily uniform. Two of the last three remaining men with their personalities still intact, Paul and Mark, were handed the role of princesses. A pile of sparkling tiaras was brought forth, and they were instructed to place them on their heads. For a moment, they hesitated. Then their eyes widened. A shiver of excitement ran through them. One by one, they carefully placed the crowns atop their heads, and suddenly, their demeanor shifted. They giggled uncontrollably, twirling in place and bouncing on their heels, their mouths curved into wide, joyful smiles. "This is amazing," Paul squealed. "Look at me. I feel like a real princess." Mark added, clasping his hands in front of him, spinning in a circle. Dennis's gaze swept the room. One by one, all the other men were now happily behaving like 8-year-old girls. Their voices were high, their motions delicate, their personalities fully immersed in this surreal world. They twirled, they clapped, they bounced. Even Sebastian, Blake, and Gary were performing little gestures of delight, laughing and showing off their special badges. Dennis alone remained. His pink jumper, sash, Mary Jane's, and tights were perfectly in place, but his hands gripped the hem of his jumper a little tighter than the others. His heart raced. He was the last man whose personality had not yet shifted. The leader called the story to order, holding up a colourful picture book. Okay, everyone. Princesses and heroes, witches and animals, let's bring our story to life. The other men leapt into their roles with gleeful abandon. Dennis's instincts screamed at him to participate, but he hesitated, unsure how long he could resist. He could see the energy radiating from the other men, the happiness etched into their transformed faces, and he realised, with a chill, that the next turn of events might not give him any choice. The tiaras of the two newly transformed princesses sparkled in the light, their giggles ringing out like tiny bells, while Dennis watched, heart pounding, clinging desperately to the last fragments of his old self. He was alone in his resistance now, and he knew it would not last much longer. Chapter 7 storytime ended with a flurry of giggles, twirls, and applause. The last lines of the story were read aloud, and the princesses and heroes froze in their final poses, grinning and laughing. Dennis, still tense, let out a quiet breath. The leaders clapped and announced, "Great job today, Troop Blossom Breeze." That's all for today. Time to head home. A wave of relief washed over Dennis. Finally, the day was over. He could leave this strange, sparkling, pink-jumpered world behind. The door opened, letting in a stream of sunlight and a flood of parents. Dennis's eyes immediately found Steph and Pammy standing in the doorway, both smiling and waving. Relief surged through him. Soon, he would be out of this bizarre Girl Scout reality and back to normal life. But before he could move, Miss Allison approached him. Her steps were gentle, her smile warm but firm. She held out a small badge in her hand. "You did very well today, Dennis," she said. "Here's your good sport badge." Dennis's heart stopped. His eyes widened in terror as he saw the badge. He screamed, a sound that seemed to echo through the hallway like the last shiver of a nightmare. And then suddenly, he jolted awake. He was in his bedroom. Sunlight spilled across his bed, dust motes dancing lazily in the morning light. He was fully himself. No pink jumper, no sash, no Mary Jane's. Just Dennis. Just his hands. Just his life. Steph was at the doorway, her brows furrowed in concern. "Dennis, what was wrong? Are you okay?" Dennis looked at her, then down at himself, noting the ordinary clothes on his body, the familiar weight of his own hands. He exhaled and smiled, feeling the remnants of the strange dream or vision fade like mist. Steph's concern didn't waver. "Dennis? What's wrong?" Dennis chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You know, I was thinking, if Pammy doesn't want to go to Girl Scouts, we shouldn't force her." Steph blinked, a small smile spreading across her face. "Sounds like a good plan." Dennis sank back into the pillows, feeling a mixture of relief, wonder, and quiet amusement. The fantastical, surreal day at Girl Scouts existed only in memory now, a vivid, strange adventure, but one that reminded him that some things are best left to choice. And with that, he closed his eyes again, content, safe, and perfectly himself.